A recent profile on Bernie Sanders in Politico shows that a growing number of establishment Democrats see him as a threat and as a serious candidate. Now, as we all know, throughout this election, they've been brushing him off. No one's been taking him seriously other than good progressives in independent media. But now there's a growing number of people who worked on Obama's campaign, in Obama's administration, and who are very much part of the Democratic establishment who are like, it kind of seems like he's pretty resilient and maybe we should be worried. So let me give you the details. Politico reports in private conversations and on social media, Democratic officials, political operatives, and pundits are reconsidering Sanders' chances. Now let me be clear, when they say reconsidering, it doesn't mean that they're like thinking of supporting him. They're gonna go after him now, and it's gonna be aggressive. And I want everyone to be prepared for that and ready to fight back. So this is from David Brock. It may have been inevitable that eventually you would have two candidates representing each side of the ideological divide in the party. A lot of smart people I've talked to lately think there's a very good chance those two end up being Biden and Sanders. They've both proven to be very resilient. And I think Brock is actually right about that, right? Yep. Now, I don't really understand the resiliency when it comes to Biden. Because Biden has, made a bunch of mistakes, missteps, gaffes, whatever you want to call them. With Bernie Sanders, the resiliency is about his heart attack, right? So he suffers this heart attack, and luckily it only hurt him for a short period of time in the polling.
And he survived two other things. One is nonstop negative coverage in the beginning, and then after the heart attack, no coverage at all, which actually hurts a lot because then you don't have any earned media. You can only get in the press through paid media and through the rallies that he does. So he survived all of that and is now peaking. But guys, this is mainly about Bernie Sanders, but don't forget about Biden. He is still leading in the national polling. He's still leading in a lot of the states. If you sleep on Biden thinking that other people are the issue, Biden will pull a Trump and win because no one bothered to fight him when he has been leading all along.
Let me give you some specifics when it comes to Biden's lead. So Politico reports that Sanders is in second place in national polls, nearly 9 percentage points behind Joe Biden. And that's according to the most recent Real Clear Politics average. He is second in Iowa and first in New Hampshire. The latest CNN poll found that he has the highest net favorability rating among any Democratic presidential candidate.
So the last part of that is about Sanders. Sanders is second in Iowa, first in New Hampshire. And his net favorability rating, I talked about this a couple of days ago, is 75% in the Democratic Party. It's the highest of all the contenders. And I ask on social media where some of the press is, guys, if he's the most popular guy in the Democratic Party, according to favorability ratings, and he never gets any positive coverage, does that make you think at all? Does that make you pause at all? Hey, maybe everyone we know doesn't like him, but 3/4 of Democrats love him. Maybe we're not representative of all the voters. But that thought never occurs to the mainstream media. In fact, there's a reference later in this article that drove me crazy.
Right, so let me just say that Bernie, for the most part, hasn't been getting a lot of negative press. I think that
since the heart attack.
Since the heart attack.
When he launched, he got hit with a giant wave of negative press.
But lately, there's been more of a blackout where they don't cover him at all, right? Yep. And so, again, I think the important takeaway from this story is that establishment figures are realizing that it's likely that he could win the nomination, or more likely that he could win the nomination, and so the attacks are coming. It's a way of kind of predicting what's to come. Now, Dan Pfeiffer, who's a former Obama administration advisor, said, "I believe people should take him very seriously. He has a very good shot of winning Iowa, a very good shot of winning New Hampshire, and other than Joe Biden, the best shot of winning Nevada. He could build a real head of steam heading into South Carolina and Super Tuesday." David Axelrod also had similar comments to make. Again, a former Obama advisor. "We never talk about Bernie Sanders." I like that he admitted that. "He's actually doing pretty well in this polling. He's actually picked up. And the fact is Bernie Sanders is as consistent can be."
So that's the part that I really want to focus on. He admits there, accidentally or otherwise, we never talk about him. Jake Tapper the other day accidentally admitted when he was talking to Mehdi Hasan, hey, we normally don't have any progressives on, but you're a progressive, so let me ask you a question, right? So I like Axelrod's quote, but I would ask him, and from time to time he actually can be quite honest. Like, did that ever make you pause? Did that make you ever reflect? Do you ever talk to anyone else in the media organizations that you're in and say, hey guys, how come we never do talk about Bernie Sanders? How come he's the most popular Democrat in terms of favorability, and he's #2 in all of the polling in all these different states? And we never mention the #2 guy. We're always talking about Buttigieg, who's #4. We're talking about Klobuchar, who's #18 or whatever she is. How come we never talk about Bernie Sanders? And I'll tell you the reason why. Because everyone in mainstream media does not like Bernie Sanders and does not believe in Bernie Sanders. They think they have always thought back in 2016 and in this election that he has no chance of winning. So since every one of them is biased against Bernie Sanders, they're in that bubble where they assume, despite seeing polling over and over and over again, they look at the polls and goes, that can't be true, because everyone I know doesn't like Bernie Sanders, doesn't think he has any chance of winning at all. Didn't that ever make you think that maybe the people you know are biased? But it never, it either never occurs to them, or maybe even worse, they talk about it and they're like, but no, like since we don't want him to win, let's not give him coverage, and if we do, let's give him really bad coverage.
Yeah, I think that's more the case. Like, I don't know. I think it's intentional and I think it's malicious. I don't think they want him to win. I think that's where it comes from. I don't think it's because they're in a thought bubble where people think it's impossible for him to win. Because look, I think that this is a good case study, right? Because now that we know that the establishment is more aware that he has a good shot at winning the nomination, let's see how they behave following this report. Let's see how they treat him.
Yeah, and look, I know the establishment media will never think we're fair because they're so biased.
They think whatever the hell they want.
Yeah, they think that anyone who doesn't love Klobuchar is by definition biased. And so they'll think, okay.
Oh yeah. Why don't you guys like the candidate who consistently tells everyone, I'm gonna do nothing for you? That's your big campaign promise.
So their bias doesn't count, and they think when we're honest about our perspective that counts and is disqualifying or whatever they call it, right? But the reality is we are honest. So I saw and we're a billion times less biased than they are. Because I saw an article about Bernie Sanders the other day on BuzzFeed News, and it was great. It was a positive article about how he's trying to actually put in the spotlight, not himself, but voters that he interacts with, and he always puts them in front of the camera and steps back, which is very unusual for a politician. And I was like, look at this, that's a positive article, a really positive article. So I'm actually thrilled to see it. And I don't look at that and go, I don't believe it. No, I'm happy to see it. And I saw, I think maybe 2 other articles this entire campaign. I'm not saying I saw all the articles, but of the ones that I saw maybe 2 others that were positive, and I've seen about 200 that were negative. And so, and it's sometimes it's brazen, sometimes it's over the top, and we've shared those on the show with you guys. We've shared a small fraction of those. A lot of times it's just in the assumptions, like just assuming that Bernie Sanders is not electable. And by the way, this article does it at Politico. And then at the end, Pfeiffer says that includes an examination of his electability. Now we're gonna look into that now. Now I looked at it today because we were doing this story. I was like, okay, I don't wanna be biased. I looked at the numbers. And Biden and Bernie Sanders are nearly tied in how well they do against Trump. So they're separated by about 3 points on both favorability and unfavorability. Buttigieg right now is losing to Trump. In the last poll, Biden and Sanders are absolutely tied. They both have a 4-point lead over Trump. Okay, Buttigieg is minus 1.2 in the collection of polls. But yet, when you talk about electability, now you watch it with your own eyes. This is what we always tell you guys. When you read the articles or you watch cable news, you'll see they will talk about Buttigieg as being electable and Bernie Sanders is not electable. Why? Why? The polling does not indicate that at all. It indicates the exact opposite. They do it because they like Buttigieg and they don't like Bernie Sanders. He doesn't match their ideology, and they're deeply, deeply biased.
Look, think about the Mimi Rocha segment where she said, I don't know what it is about Bernie Sanders, but he makes my skin crawl. Like, that is the expert political analysis that mainstream media has in regard to Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
Intentional and malicious. So look, what I love is that he has the right people working for him in his campaign. Faz Shakir, who's his campaign manager, had a great comment. So they want to look into Sanders's electability and they want to start scrutinizing him a little more. And he says, Faz Shakir says, we want that. I'd love to be able to argue why he stands a better chance to beat Donald Trump than Joe Biden.
Last thing on this, guys, is if they looked at it honestly, I would love it too. because they would then have to report that Bernie Sanders does great on electability, and they'd have to report the real numbers, right? But they're not gonna do that. They're just gonna assume he's not electable and then write it down. They're gonna do it. You'll see it with your own eyes. They've done it 100 times. Why do I think they're gonna do it? Because they already did it 1,000 times, 100 times, 1,000 times. Okay, so my guess is, and you'll see it, that they'll do the opposite. They'll report the opposite of what is true. If they actually looked into his electability and looked at the numbers, I'd say fantastic. That's exactly what we want. Why do people like Bernie Sanders? Because he's the only honest politician. And if you look at the numbers on honesty, cares about people like me, I relate to him, etc. Number one, number one, number one. Do you ever see that in the press? So I hope Faz is right. I hope that at some point the mainstream media does any kind of objective, real reporting, but it hasn't happened yet. So I'm not that hopeful. Thanks for watching the Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.